Before we begin carving out our Tsubas, there's a few things I wanted to go over in terms of layout and design that you should take into consideration. The first is the purpose of the Tsuba. The Tsuba's purpose is actually as a handguard, not from an opponent's blade, but actually to prevent your own hand from sliding up onto your own blade and cutting your hand that way. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the purpose is, and from that you can kind of derive a shape and a size that'll work for you. Now as far as shape goes, a quick Google search will yield several results onto shapes that are commonly used, but you can technically, as far as I know, do whatever you'd like, as long as it would fit the purpose of preventing your hand from sliding onto your blade. Personally, I've seen several that are shaped like an oval or an ellipse. I've seen ones that are perfect circles, but you also see ones that have squares with the corners cut out, just plain rectangles at all. And you see ones that have engravings on them. You see ones that have sometimes these holes on either side. Those are actually for other fittings that go into the saya or the sheath. So there's actually a lot of variation on these, which brings up my next point. This is something that you should spend a lot of time, or at least more than normal, in terms of designing what's going to go on your Tsuba. Is going to be a little bit more involved than, say, your seppa or your habaki, where those pieces don't have a lot of surface area and not always the eye-catching pieces. This is going to be one of the first pieces that you actually get to put your design into. Now, that not to mean that you need to put lots of design work into it. If it fits your design to have just a plain surface, if you just cut out this oval and a hole for your tang, if that's the way you want it, perfect. You can leave it that way. But this is something that you really want to think about in terms of how does this work with the overall design of the sword. But again, like I said, that doesn't mean that it has to be fancy. You can leave it as simple as you'd like, and that'll work just fine. So, in terms of what we're going to do here, the typical size that I use, you can see I've just cut a piece of the 1/4 inch wood that we've been using. And this is actually 3 inches tall, top to bottom, and it's actually 2.5 inches wide. Now, you can see I'm not actually going to use that full size, but this gives me a good starting point to work off of, a good template, you might say. And from here, I'm actually going to transcribe any design I had onto here, and that way I can see if my design is going to fit, if it's going to look good. So this is where you take your paper design and put it on the actual object. And again, some of the things you might want to think about are the overall shape. If you want a kind of border going around, what design you might want to carve in here. If you want a hole going all the way through, called piercing. If you want to pierce all the way around, however you want to do that, that's something you should think about. And then draw it out, see how it looks. And you also want to be sure of two things. One, that it looks good, and two, that you think about both sides of the Tsuba. You have a little bit of freedom in terms of you can carve something here and carve something different back here. Or you could leave this plain and this have a nice carving, however you want to choose, but just don't ignore the back side. You can leave it blank, but just don't ignore it. Just to kind of give you an example, you can see here, this is one that I've actually painted, but I've also engraved. This is one that I made from an older tanto that I made with an old style, so this hole is incorrect. However, it does have that oval shape. It does have a little engraving, which I just made with my knife, and then I just painted it for effect. So you can see how just a little bit, I mean this did not take me all that long, although the planning did. The actual work didn't take all that long, and it gives it a nice little effect that's simple and actually goes into the design of the rest of the tanto. You can see I've actually transferred that design onto painting done on the sheath. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of design. Now, in terms of what we need to do for construction, again, like I said, you're going to lay out your design onto your piece of wood. And once you're happy with it, and once you've considered both sides, what you want to do is you want to find the hole where your tang's going to go through. And that's before you do everything else. You start here. The reason for that is if you mess this up, all this goes out the window. So to start off with, we need to find a center line. Now, as I said, this is 3 inches, so you actually want to go 1.5 inches to the center line and then just draw a square line all the way down. And then that's your center. And then you want to measure the width of this, actually the height here, from here to here, and you want to put that right in the middle, okay? And that way you're going to have equal spacing all around to make your design fit. So then once you found your middle, trace around the outside of the seppa and trace the inside of the seppa. And that's where you get that initial spacing. Now the reason why you trace the inside and the outside, of course the inside is the space you're going to actually chisel out and cut out. The outside, however, since it's going to be covered by a seppa, should be probably left blank, because any design work you do here is going to get covered by your seppa. So it's kind of, might be a wasted effort. Now if you want to do a nice little engraving or something in here that's supposed to be hidden, that's great. But just keep in mind that that will actually be covered on both sides with the seppa. So that's pretty much it in terms of laying it out in design work. One more thing I did want to talk about was those holes that you sometimes see on Tsuba. What these were for is so that you could access 2 accessories that would sometimes show up on Katana. Excuse me if I butcher it, but Kokatana and Kogai, which were accessories. One was a small knife, almost like a utility knife, that you could use without drawing your sword. It's not like a combat thing, but it's a utility knife. And the other was like a pen, which I've heard several different stories as to what its actual purpose was. I'm still not sure, but some people have said that it's actually for trophies, that you can collect trophies with. It's basically a pen, a giant spike. I've also heard of it used as like a hairpin. So it's kind of up in the air as far as I know. But those holes were there so that you could actually, they're stored right in the sheath next to the blade in their own separate spaces. So you can reach them by pushing them through this hole. Now we don't have to draw your whole sword out and then draw your accessories. You can just draw your accessories right through. So that's what those holes are for. And I'm actually going to include Kokatana on mine, but you don't have to, and I'm not actually going to cover it in the tutorial, but that's what those holes are for. So as far as construction goes, it's actually very simple in terms of cutting this initial hole. It's the same thing as you did with your seppa. You just take your knife, okay, and you're going to cut your outline in, just like you did on your seppa. And then you're going to take your chisel and chisel out those pieces. Now what's going to be trouble is these sharp angles here, because this is not going to fit really your chisel. If you're using a 1/4 inch chisel or bigger, you can have a hard time chiseling that out. And same up here, your chisel probably won't fit in there either. So for there, as I mentioned in my chisel tips section, you just want to be able to stick your knife tip in there and pull some of those pieces out when you get there. And same for here, you might have to cut in. So once you cut down, you may also come in here with an angle and cut that piece out and pry it up. So overall construction wise, it's pretty basic. So once you have that hole pierced out though, and you've cut out your outside, then you're kind of free to do your engravings on here if you want to. You can pierce a hole straight through. If you're going to pierce all the way through, like you did here, here's another way you can do it. You can also, if you happen to have an electric drill or a hand drill, you can drill a small hole big enough to fit your hacksaw blade through, your coping saw blade through, and once you've drilled your hole out, then you can actually take the blade off of your saw, thread it through, put it back on the saw, and then you can do a quick cut. And then you have to undo it all to take it back off. But that'll allow you to do a quick saw cut as opposed to actually doing all the chisel work, especially here around these curves. So that's pretty much it for the Tsuba. That's how it's all going to work, and in the next video I'll show you more progress on it.